Marie? We ready? Okay. Okay. Good afternoon. I want to thank everyone for joining us today to discuss Education in the Crosshairs, Part 3, what dismantling the Department of Education means for students in terms of student loans. And I'm convinced this evening, because my colleagues and I asked the chairman to invite the office of, I'm convening this event today because my colleagues and I asked the chairman of the committee to invite the Office of Federal Student Aid to testify at the growing student loan crisis and the devastating impact that the Republicans' big ugly bill has on students, borrowers, and families across the country. Regrettably, we have not received a response, so today we're bringing together experts to help answer questions that millions of borrowers, families, and frankly many of us in Congress have been asking. The need for this event is becoming much more urgent. Earlier this year, Senator Sanders and I released a GAO report on the Department of Education's oversight of the federal student loan system. GAO found that the administration has effectively ended oversight of the accuracy of information that student loan services are providing to borrowers, leaving 43 million borrowers without the support that they need. Student loan debt now exceeds $1.7 trillion. Borrowers need clear guidance and certainty. Instead, they're forced to deal with uncertainty and chaos created by an administration that has systematically weakened the federal student aid system. Moreover, the administration has announced plans to transfer key student aid functions to the Department of Treasury, which has no expertise serving students or institutions of higher education or monitoring servicers for accuracy. Compounding the issues that have risen from the dismantling of the Education Department are the sweeping changes to the student loan program, which Republicans passed in their big ugly bill. The law replaced income-driven repayment plans with a single, less affordable option that will increase monthly payments for many borrowers by as much as $200 a month. It also eliminates long-standing protections that prevented borrowers from carrying debt indefinitely. These changes come at the worst possible time, as millions of borrowers are experiencing delinquency and default for the first time in more than 5 years. The big ugly bill also makes college less affordable for the next generation of students. It eliminates Grad Plus loans, capped Parent Plus loans, limited access to Pell Grants in certain situations, and created new lifetime borrowing limits that leave many students without enough federal aid to complete their education. Future nurses, teachers, social workers, firefighters, physical and occupational therapists, physicians, lawyers, and countless other professionals will now be forced to rely on high-interest private loans that offer fewer protections and can create even greater financial hardship if they can get one. And unfortunately, the Department's recently finalized rule, which defines what a professional degree is, only doubles down on the harmful policies instead of using its authority to lessen its impact. It adopts an unnecessarily narrow definition that will further restrict access to affordable federal student loans. In fact, several states are currently suing the department, and this definition is currently being blocked from implementation by a federal judge. In addition, my colleague, Representative Bonamici, and I, along with other congressional Democrats, have introduced a Congressional Review Act resolution to overturn this harmful rule. There's a better path forward. The Democrats are working to lower the cost of college, strengthen the federal aid program, protect borrowers, and expand opportunity. We've introduced legislation such as the Lowering Obstacles to Achievement Now, the Loan Act, to preserve and expand the Pell Grant, improve repayment options, strengthen public service loan forgiveness, and make higher education more affordable and accessible for students. And other bills are also pending, those that some address interest rates specifically. Today's event is an opportunity to examine how the dismantling of the federal student aid system, combined with harmful new student loan policies, are affecting millions of American students. It's also an opportunity to hear directly from experts about what Congress should be doing to protect borrowers instead of making their financial burdens heavier. We're fortunate to be joined by a panel of experts. Will DePillar, the Vice President, Senior Vice President at Ed Trust, Claire McCain, Managing Director of Policy and Operations at the Post-Secondary Education and Economics Research, PEER, Jose Miranda, the Senior Director of Federal External Affairs at the Institute of College Access and Success, and James Carroll, Summer Fellow at the United States Students Association. I thank you all for being here today and look forward to your testimony. And we'll start with Mr. Carroll. Before we start, people can take these seats back here if instead of standing up. You can have the advantage of looking at the witnesses. Thank you. Mr. Carroll.
Good afternoon, Ranking Member Scott and members of the committee. Thank you for inviting me to a testimony today. My name is James Lamar Carroll IV. I'm a rising senior at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, where I serve as the Vice President of the Student Government Association and President of the UMass Amherst NAACP chapter. Also, I serve in the United States Army National Guard and a summer fellow with the United States Students Association. USAA is the country's oldest and largest student-run organization, representing 2.7 million students across the United States who believe education is a right. Whether I am wearing a uniform for this country, representing students on my campus, or organizing with student leaders across the nation, my commitment is the same. I love to serve. I believe that service means leaving the next generation with more opportunity than the next that comes before it. That's why I'm here today. I believe the promise that higher education should be within the reach of every student willing to pursue it. I am a first-generation Black college student. I come from a low-income family, and the Pell Grant, federal financial aid, and student loans made it possible for me to attend college today. Without those public investments, I would not be sitting here before the committee today. This summer, I experienced another reminder how fragile my access to education can be. I was not selected in my university housing lottery, forcing me to find an off-campus housing, and also whether if I had to take on another job to afford rent for my senior year. Also, instead of focusing preparing on my graduation, serving my fellow students, and fulfilling my responsibilities in the National Guard, I have to plan my summer around figuring out how I'm going to keep a roof over my head and pay for education. My story just isn't unique. Students across the country are balancing tuition, rent, paying for groceries, transportation, childcare, student textbooks, and working all at the same time trying to get a degree. The financial pressures facing students already are unanimous. That is why the changes made by the One Big Beautiful Bill Act is so scary. When Congress eliminates Graduate Plus loans, that is not simply a line in a bill. It means students who dream of becoming doctors, lawyers, social workers, professors, attorneys, researchers will only have two terrible choices: take out expensive private loans or decide graduate school is no longer a financial possibility. The problem facing students is not that many people have access to federal student loans. The problem is that college has been too expensive in the first place. Students expect organizations like the United States Students Association to help them navigate this moment. Yet too often, answers remain unclear, but students are not paying attention. But because of the implementation has been confusing, guidance continues to evolve, and the students are being asked to make lifetime-changing financial decisions without certainty they deserve. Finally, education is just not about preparing people for jobs. It's about preparing people for citizenship. As someone who has chosen to serve this country in uniform, I believe a strong democracy depends on educated people. Higher education is not simply an investment in an individual. It is one of our nation's greatest investments in future generations. My generation is asking for the same promise that generations before us believed in, that if you work hard, have talent, the determination and the willingness, and to seek education should be within reach. I was given an opportunity to pursue higher education because our country invested in students like me. I hope that students who come after me will be able to say the same thing. Thank you.
Del Pilar. Regret to have to go after James. Thank you for your statement. Ranking Member Scott and members of the Committee on Education and Workforce, thank you for the opportunity and invitation to speak to you today about H.R. 1's negative impacts on student loan borrowers and educational equity. My name is Will Del Pilar, and I am Senior Vice President at EdTrust, a national nonprofit organization focused on closing opportunity gaps and advancing racial and economic justice in education. At EdTrust, we believe that education is not just a pathway to opportunity, it is a civil right. EdTrust firmly believes that every student has the potential to achieve their dreams. Post-secondary education is a critical pathway to intergenerational social and economic mobility for individuals and their families. The strength of our economy, the resilience of our democracy, and our competitiveness in the global marketplace all depend on ensuring that every student has access to a high-quality education that prepares them for success. However, too many students, particularly students of color, students from low-income backgrounds, English language learners, and students with disabilities continue to face barriers that limit, obstruct, or prevent these opportunities. Ultimately, H.R. 1 erected more barriers for student borrowers by reducing access to affordable repayment options and increasing the cost of higher education, particularly for borrowers of color and student parents. Rather than strengthening pathways to college affordability and financial security, the legislation will shift more of the costs and risks of higher education onto students and families who already face significant financial barriers. The result is higher monthly payments, greater long-term debt burdens, and increased economic insecurity for many of the nation's most vulnerable borrowers. In particular, borrowers of color will be especially harmed by H.R. 1 due to reliance on federal lending to access higher education. Persistent, policy-driven racial wealth gaps mean that many Black, Latino, and Native families have fewer financial resources to pay for college. Black borrowers often graduate with higher levels of student debt and experience greater difficulty repaying their loans. H.R. 1's elimination of existing income-based repayment plan, especially the SAVE plan, will force many borrowers of color to devote a larger share of their income to loan payments and wait longer for any potential forgiveness while delaying opportunities to purchase homes, build savings, invest in retirement, or accumulate generational wealth. EdTrust is already seeing this on social media, with borrowers expressing shock at their monthly payments jumping by $500, $1,000, or even more, with no ability to pay that amount. H.R. 1 means that millions of borrowers are now facing years, even decades, of additional financial strain and much higher overall repayment costs. The legislation also creates significant hardship for student parents who make up more than 1 in 5 of all college students and often balance work, caregiving, and academic responsibilities. Many depend on federal student loans not only to cover tuition, but also to pay for essential living expenses, including housing, like James mentioned, food, childcare, transportation, and healthcare. H.R. 1's changes increase the chances that student parents will pause or be forced to totally abandon their education before obtaining a credential. In addition to the negative impact on borrowers, H.R. 1 restricts access to federal graduate lending, pushing many borrowers, especially those from low-income and middle-income backgrounds, many of whom are students of color, into the hands of private banks. That means higher interest rates, fewer consumer protections, stricter credit requirements, and flat-out denials for some, forcing those students to halt their educational journey. In particular, the bill will limit the ability of students of color and student parents working towards becoming much-needed teachers and medical professionals to the detriment of themselves, their families, their community, and the country as a whole. Ultimately, H.R. 1 makes pursuing higher education riskier and more expensive for millions of people, and borrowers of color and student parents will bear some of the heaviest burdens, making it more difficult for them to complete their degrees, repay loans successfully, and achieve financial security. As you work to address these negative changes and improve our nation's higher education system, EdTrust stands ready to partner with you on this important work. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. McCann.
Thank you. Ranking Member Scott and members of the committee, thank you for the invitation to speak here today. As Managing Director of the Post-Secondary Education and Economics Research Center, it's an honor to share our research and my perspectives with you and the committee at this pivotal moment for higher education in the United States. Higher education is a source of economic mobility for low-income individuals and an engine of the American economy. The federal role in supporting access to higher education, including through Pell Grants and student loans, has been critical to opening the door to those benefits for low-income students. A year ago, congressional Republicans passed H.R. 1, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. This legislation, and especially its new limits on student and parent borrowing, will dramatically reshape how Americans access and pay for higher education. According to our analyses, new loan limits for graduate students will curtail federal borrowing for about 1/3 of students who currently rely on loans to pay for their education. Graduate students who enroll part-time will see their eligibility further reduced. Including that provision, more than 500,000 graduate students could be impacted each year. In total, the limits will put a hole of up to $10 billion annually into graduate students' financing. These changes will force many students to turn to the private loan market, where they will need to navigate finding loans with affordable terms, managing separate servicers and payment systems, and balancing payments on both federal and private loans. More importantly, Peer Center research estimates that nearly 40% of the students who will have their borrowing capped by the new limits have either poor or no credit scores, and so are unlikely to qualify for private loans unless they have a cosigner. Many of those students will be at risk of seeing their educational plans derailed altogether. To be clear, allowing largely unlimited graduate lending, as in the past, is unwise. It puts both students and taxpayers at risk. But as lawmakers who are closely watching how these rules impact real students, I'm sure it seems apparent that there are more sensible approaches to setting loan limits. Congress should allow students to borrow enough to make high-return investments in themselves, so long as their loans remain affordable and repayable based on the salary students should expect. The two-sizes-fit-all answer in H.R. 1, which set out only 2 categories of graduate loan limits, can't encompass the range of ROI that students in different programs can expect. Over their careers, for instance, educators with a master's degree will make about 4 times less than doctors will. Overly restricting the financing that low-income students rely on to fund their graduate studies will hinder economic mobility and limit economic growth. A more nuanced framework for loan limits, tied to students' earning potential, would ensure that students can get the financing they need from the federal government, while protecting students from unaffordable debts and protecting taxpayers from loans that go unpaid. Undergraduate students may also find it harder to finance their education. Nearly 1 in 3 of the almost 750,000 parents who take out loans to help pay for their children to go to college will also see a gap in their financing. And like graduate borrowers, the nearly 2 in 5 undergraduate students who enroll part-time will see their loan eligibility reduced. While this might help them to avoid running up too high debt loads, that change is coming with little warning, taking effect this year even for students who were already enrolled in college. Students and parent borrowers across the higher education system will need support in finding viable college financing options, and a checkered history in the private loan sector suggests that strong oversight of those lenders will be increasingly important. An effective student loan system should open doors for students who might otherwise be locked out of opportunity, providing access to programs that will help them improve their family's economic circumstances while keeping payments reasonable and affordable. An important complement that's still missing is a robust accountability framework that will protect students and taxpayers from the programs where financial value is especially low. As these new student loan changes reshape the landscape of higher education access and affordability, my colleagues and I at the Peer Center remain ready to work with you toward those goals. Thank you for your time. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Mr. Miranda.
Thank you, Ranking Member Scott and members of the committee for hosting this discussion. And thank you to my fellow panelists and everyone in attendance for participating. My name is Jose Miranda, and I'm the Senior Director of Federal External Affairs at the Institute for College Access and Success, TICAS. We at TICAS believe that our higher education system can be improved by data-informed policy decisions that make it more affordable on the front end and keep borrowers out of delinquency and default in the back end. Based on the modeling projections we ran last summer, we believe that the new repayment assistance plan moves us away from those goals. The flaws in the policy designs are only exacerbated by the spotty rollout and implementation that we are seeing this summer. In the debt finance system that we have, federal loans are a key piece for making higher education accessible, especially for many low and moderate income students. Unfortunately, repaying these loans could be a challenge for many borrowers. Income-driven repayment plans were designed to ease this challenge and ensure that borrowers could take the financial risk to pursue higher education. The basis of these repayment plans was a formula that accounted for the income and family size of borrowers and protected a portion of that income. To this day, IDRs are the best option that we have to reduce delinquency and default among borrowers. However, through reconciliation, Congress made drastic changes to our federal student loan system and departed from this data-informed practices that shaped the design of income-driven repayment plans. In the fall of 2005, TICAS and Data for Progress organized a survey where borrowers stated that managing student loan debt is making it more difficult to keep up with other bills, cover healthcare costs, and save for retirement. 42% of borrowers surveyed reported making trade-offs between loan payments and covering their basic needs. 20% of those surveyed stated that they are currently either in delinquency or default. This was all prior to the new plan taking effect this month. And as I said, our modeling on the proposal showed that this plan will be more expensive for many borrowers and could put them at further risk of becoming delinquent or defaulting entirely. Unfortunately, this rollout left more open questions than answers, and our concerns now extend not just at the inability of borrowers to pay their loans under the new plan, but at how many borrowers are going to slip through the cracks due to confusion and lack of clear communication. This is especially the case for more than 7 million borrowers who enrolled in the same plan. Leading up to July 1st, all these borrowers had to go off was knowing that a transition would begin and that they would have 90 days from the time they are notified to transfer over. The department has not provided public details on how they plan to roll out these notices, such as when or how borrowers will receive them. All we know is that it will be on a rolling basis. Reporting from the Wall Street Journal last week indicated that 1 million borrowers had been notified in early July, and more were slated to be notified last week. But the cadence and volume of these notifications is unclear, as is the type of borrowers who are receiving them. A Nelnet FAQ page, Nelnet being one of the servicers that FSA contracts, now shows that borrowers will receive notices by the end of 2026. but FSA on its official page did not include this information as of July 1st. The number of borrowers that are transitioning out of SAVE does not even include the significant backlog of borrowers switching income-driven repayment plans. An April court filing indicated that there were over 500,000 pending IDR enrollment requests as of March 31st, 2006. This is all happening under the context of an education department that has suffered significant downsizing, yet the department has not told borrowers how long it will take for servicers to process plan applications, and has given no indication of what recourse borrowers would have if they lose out on months of credit towards loan discharge or face mounting interest charges due to processing delays. Our survey also found that nearly half of borrowers have said they are facing long wait times to speak or receive a response from a loan servicer when they reach out for assistance. The same reporting from the Wall Street Journal indicated that nearly 1 million borrowers have moved out of the SAVE plan, but only 30% have chosen RAP, the Repayment Assistance Plan. 50% moved into the older income-based repayment plan, and 20% have moved into the pay and ICR plans, both of which are phasing out in 2028. So in 2 years, these borrowers will once again have to go through this process. This shows that our modeling to be correct in the unaffordability of the new repayment assistance plan compared to other income-driven repayment plans it is replacing. I'd like to point out that all these numbers that I've shared up to this point are either from data as old as March or from a Wall Street Journal publication, and none of this data has been made public to the rest of us. In order to truly assess the impact of these loan repayment changes on borrowers or the effectiveness of the transition, borrowers, organizations like TICAS, Congress, and the public in general need more information and access to the data from the department. This is the only way that we can truly continue modeling projections for borrower profiles and in turn provide Congress data-driven recommendations to how to further improve the system moving forward. Finally, I'd be remiss if I did not mention that as these changes take place, alongside new restrictions on loans for graduate programs that Claire mentioned, borrowers may be pushed into the private lending market to finance their education. While we may not see that data immediately, it's something that we should keep a close eye on and be proactive to ensure that borrowers do not get trapped in riskier private loans with significantly less protections for them. At TCAS, we stand ready to crunch the numbers and work with Congress to ensure that moving forward, borrowers do not get left behind and that we can continue improving our system of higher education by truly making it affordable for all students. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you want to ask any questions right now? You want me to start? Say again? Okay. Mr. Miranda, a lot of people have questions. What effect will the department losing half its staff have on its ability to respond?
So, that's unclear. When you ask the department, they will tell you that most of the folks interacting with students are contracted and it's all the servicers, and so the loss in staff had no impact on that. But again, just last fall, we heard that nearly half of borrowers who we surveyed were still having an issue with contacting their servicers, the folks that they're supposed to be communicating on behalf of the department. And one other thing
that's the way it's supposed to work, but the staff at the department is supposed to be overseeing the servicers, and they stopped doing it. So when the servicers aren't doing their job.
And there's one more thing to point out. Last Congress, when the reconciliation bill passed, the bill included an additional $1 billion for FSA, supposedly to help with these transitions. But as far as we know, Congress has not been updated on how these funds have been spent. We don't know how these funds have been spent. Ideally, it would have been used so that there's more capacity to support borrowers, but we're not really seeing that right now.
Ranking Member Scott, I have an example of how the rifts at the department and the IAAs are being harmful in terms of how people are being served. Recently, HHS put out confusing and incorrect information about domestic and international students in terms of who qualifies for C Campus, which is the main vehicle to pay for child care for student parents on college campuses. Per HEA, there are some foreign students in the country on a temporary basis that can qualify for funds, But in the HHS webinar, they articulated that international students are not eligible for this funding support as they are typically not eligible to complete a FAFSA and that thus would not be eligible for Pell Assistance. Even the annual report form for C Campus includes a space to report on foreign students. And what has happened is it's confused colleges, and the misinformation that HHS and Ed have put out have lead to further, I think, misunderstanding on who's actually eligible for these federal funds.
Thank you. Ms. McCain, you mentioned on the fact that the reduction in student loan limits is supposed to keep people from excessive borrowing. Is there any evidence that it actually reduces the cost of college, or are we just talking about limiting opportunity?
Unfortunately, not much research to suggest that taking away access to federal loans will lead colleges to reduce their tuition or lower the costs to students. What we have seen, at least anecdotally, as colleges are starting to roll out some of these changes and communicate with their borrowers, is that more often they're directing them to private loans, suggesting they look to the private loan market. And so I think, there has been some research to indicate that creating the Grad Plus program led colleges to raise costs, and unfortunately not much evidence to suggest it will work in the other direction.
Now, if you have to go into the private loan market, what effect does everybody knows there's discrimination in lending, that minorities pay higher interest rates? How does the problem by getting shuffled over to the private loan market affect students, particularly in their ability to even get a loan?
Yeah, we're very concerned that for many borrowers who want to continue to pursue a graduate education, that they will find themselves locked out of the private market or unable to access affordable loans without a qualified cosigner. And our research suggests that among the borrowers who are likely to be impacted by this, that's almost 40% of borrowers who do not have a credit score sufficient to qualify for private loans without a cosigner.
And again, it's worth pointing out that the private lending market offers significantly less protections for borrowers. They're not required to do discharges for permanent disability, or if the borrower passes away, the family would get stuck with it. And for borrowers, like Claire was saying, if they don't qualify on the credit worthiness, then they're going to be stuck with significantly, and I would say predatory, interest rates.
And then also not eligible for public service loan forgiveness or any of the other programs.
Thank you all for joining us in this valuable information. I'm Johanna Hayes, Congresswoman from Connecticut's 5th Congressional District. Thank you. We've heard all of this before, but I feel like right now we are illuminating the problem that we all know exists. The students I taught, I was a teenage mom. I put myself and my daughter through school. When you talk about students having a parent, I taught students who had a parent who also had a low credit score or an income that wasn't enough. First of all, the cost of college should not be this high. It should not be this difficult to attain an education. But when we're talking about who will be affected, we all know who will be affected. I had students who, I don't know, when we talk about Pell Grants, you have a felony arrest, you're no longer eligible for these things, which meant that young people couldn't get back on track, couldn't get back into the system. It shouldn't be this hard to get an education. So I guess my question is, if we had to talk about where do we go from here, this is an abysmal disaster right now. There shouldn't be all of these qualifying factors. It shouldn't be this hard to get a loan. Students shouldn't have to keep trying to refinance and seek out new lenders. They shouldn't have to wait for one program to expire and then start looking for another one. It is impossible to navigate. And then with the erosion of all of our first generation college student programs that are meant to help those students who are the first in their family to go to college, who have never navigated a FAFSA form, who don't know how to access some of the opportunities that might be available, or who come from a state like mine where Connecticut does allow some sort of assistance for dreamers and undocumented students. So navigating those competing programs is equally a challenge. It should not be this hard. It should not be this hard, because what I know about talent, I mean, there's not a lack of talent. It's the lack of opportunity that our students are facing. So if you had to say, I guess I'm trying to be forward thinking about what do we do next? Like, we can't keep saying this is what they've done, this is how bad they've made it, these are all the challenges. We all know that. If we had to pick two things, what would you say we should focus on to say, you know, how do we hold the Department of Education accountable, especially for the way they're managing these programs? And then how do we attempt to put it back together to make sure that, I mean, between the interest rates, the expiration of some of these programs, the reclassifying of professional degrees, there are so many things that are stacking every odd against a kid who just wants an education.
We have to remove the barriers to entry for students. And one of the biggest barriers is the barrier of affordability. I think that what we need to be providing in this country, and other countries do that, is an affordability guarantee for low and moderate income students so that they can go to college tuition
Or
free.
for everyone. Or for everyone.
Or for
I would
everyone.
argue that, because one of the things is, I mean, I got a degree and a graduate degree and a postgraduate degree, and the salary that I was making 15 years in was not the salary that I started with.
Mm-hmm.
But the student loan payments didn't change, and I really think that we have to flip this on its head and stop trying to figure out ways to help students finance a $100,000 degree to get a $40,000 job and bring the cost of that degree down to something that is a lot more affordable.
If college was tuition free, students could use their Pell Grants to pay for their living expenses, which was one of the largest expenses the students face. You can't do that, though, without a strong accountability system. If you create a free college system that is only based on access and not based on success, degrees produced, the outcomes that students experience, and then you create a system that is only dumping money in and not getting anything out. And so I do think...
Well, it doesn't have to be free, but I think that there has, because even when you look at, and I'm not even talking about private Ivy, small campuses, even our state schools, you know, which is supposed to be a public education, the price is astronomical. So even if it's not free, there has to be some meeting in the middle where, I mean, because I had a lot of students who had the talent, but when you're looking at this as the outcome and the prospects, it's like, you know what, I can't put off 4, 5, 6 years of making an income and be in all this debt. So I'm not advocating free, I get it, but there has to be a shift in how we view higher education.
In this country, we find money to pay for other priorities. We could find money to pay for tuition at public 2- and 4-year higher education institutions. So I think that as we prioritize in this country what we're willing to pay for and what we're not willing to pay for, education for students, especially those students who struggle the most to pay, to me is a worthwhile investment, but it has to be balanced with an accountability system that holds colleges accountable for that investment from federal dollars.
And I'll add one, seconding everything that was just said. I think we need to make sure that that students don't have to borrow to be able to attend school in the first place. But looking specifically to the student loan situation, and just trying to think about two concrete things we can do moving forward, that Congress can do moving forward, is one, for better or worse, when it comes to the repayment plans, Congress will now have to act because the reconciliation law took away the department's ability to establish new repayment plans. And so any new changes, any improvements will now have to come from Congress. And the one thing I would do is, we don't want to start from scratch, but we probably want to build on the repayment assistance plan to actually truly make it an income-driven repayment plan that will recognize that as individuals, as humans, we have basic needs that we have to cover. That was the whole point of IDRs, right? The recognition that some of your income needs to be protected because you have to pay your bills, and then any excess money is what you can use to repay your loans. we should try to go back to that. Happy to have those conversations as Congress deliberates on what the formulas could be, what the strategies could be, but truly converting the repayment assistance plan into an income-driven repayment plan would be the first step. And the other one, as Ranking Member Scott alluded to, this has been an issue even before reconciliation, but ensuring that FSA has the staffing, the capacity, and that is properly doing oversight over servicers that are supposed to be interacting with borrowers.
The We have a model for a repayment plan, and that's the plan that the Biden plan that has just been thrown out, and they're moving people out of that. It had a protected amount of income and a percentage after that, a lower percentage than you were paying now, so it's certainly affordable. And this whole thing isn't new. When President Johnson signed the Higher Education Act in 1965, he said that it meant that any student in any state could apply to any college and not be turned away because the family was poor. And that was true because the Pell Grant paid 80% of the cost of going to a state college, tuition, room, and board. 80%. You could work a summer job and part-time during the school year and, quote, work your way through college, come out with no debt. Now, the Loan Act that I've introduced just doubles the Pell Grant. It doesn't even get you back to where you used to be. So we've got a lot of work to do. And I was just on the floor a few minutes ago talking about what we're spending money, $95 billion in this reconciliation bill, and nothing for education. So, I mean, you're right. Things we can do. That big ugly bill, we went over $4.5 trillion in debt, and ended up cutting education. I mean, with that kind of funding, we could have done all kinds of things for education. And we have a little, every now and then we do something right. In the crime bill in the early 1990s, they eliminated Pell Grants for prisoners. And just a couple of years ago, when I was chair of the committee, we worked out an arrangement where we restored prisoners' right to get Pell Grants. So while they're in prison, they can be getting an education and come out much more educated than they went in. We couldn't pass it as a freestanding bill. We stuck it in an omnibus spending bill, which in military terms was a target-rich environment for complaints. And so this kind of slid on through. People didn't pay much attention to it because there are other things to shoot at. But we were able to get that, make that improvement. But we have had a time where college was affordable, and we've spent a lot of money on all kinds of things to just make it a priority. We can afford it. It's just a matter of political will and priorities. Are there other questions? Other questions? Do we have any questions? If you have a question, CG said they have to come down here. If anybody has a question, we have about 5 minutes or so. Did they call votes yet?
Also going to say that one of my major concerns, especially with these changes to loan forgiveness and professional degrees, is that the communities who need it the most will not have professionals who come back and work in those communities. Because right now, this is a structure where only the families who can afford to send their children to college to get advanced degrees, engineers, teachers, nurses, things like that, only those families who can afford to do that will do it. So young people from marginalized communities will not go off to school and come back to those communities to be of service, to be public servants, because they cannot afford it. On our committee, I often hear our colleagues talk about, if you can't go to college, if you can't afford to go to college, you shouldn't go, or all of these young people should go to trade schools and get a job immediately. We can't have every child from every low-income community going to trade schools. Even those communities need social workers and teachers and nurses and engineers and architects and all of the things. And as we are talking about addressing this issue, I think we have to be targeted just like we are with every other issue. There are populations of people who need more help than others. And this is one of those instances where that is the case. And as we see, everything from Upward Bound to TRIO to all of these programs, funding being reduced, how do we continue to support those students who need more, who have less available, but we still need to keep them engaged and in the pipeline?
They've called votes.
Oh.
So we have. We've got time to get there. Is there any other pressing question? If yes, quickly.
So there is a provision tucked into OB3 saying that it's capping part-time students on student loans. It's prorating it with the number of credits they're teaching. I was wondering if you had any thoughts on that.
I have some. It just limits opportunities. Does anybody on the panel have a question about the limitation on part-time students?
I have concerns about that. Oftentimes, if you are working, everybody's not a traditional student, and if it takes you longer to graduate, if there are things, and we have programs that recognize those flexibilities. You talked about student merits, differently. There are lots of different situations where people are working full time. It doesn't mean that they don't have the same level of investment or need the help. And a lot of times, everybody knows you get that aid letter. That's a determination of how you're going to map out your next steps. So there has to be some flexibility on acknowledging that students come, non-traditional students, very different pathways, are taking different classes, might have a combination of online, in-person, whatever. And just understanding, how do you map out the full, when I started at community college, I sat down with my counselor and mapped out the whole 2 years. And there were semesters where I was a full-time student, there were semesters where I had to take a summer class because I had to work more, different things, and that has to be a part of the calculus.
I was just going to say quickly, if you're a part-time student, your rent isn't part-time, your food expenses aren't part-time, your transportation expenses aren't part-time. So those things do not decrease because you're a part-time student. So reducing access, and there is some research that shows that some borrowing at community college actually improves completion. And so some borrowing is okay. I'm not sure if eliminating borrowing for part-time students actually does what we think it's going to do. We may actually drive more students into either like quarter time or below, or completely stopping out of college.
Just limits opportunities for those that can't go full time.
Can you stand up, please?
This is the last question.
These changes seem to run adjacent to the president's anti-DEI policies, acknowledging that there are more Black women who have education beyond undergrad, and in some cases beyond grad school, multiple degrees there. This is an attack, as it appears, on those particular groups as well. When we talk about access, we're also looking at the access that has been created over the past at least 2 decades, where we've seen more people of color, particularly more women, enter into the collegiate experience. With that being said, acknowledging that 600,000 plus Black women are currently unemployed, many of them with degrees, what are some of the next steps that are actionable for those who are experiencing not only seeing their payments more than double in many cases, but are also facing this with the backdrop of a affordability crisis?
Well, in terms of paying off your loans, the income-driven repayment would be helpful, because if you've got less income, you've got less of a payment. You need to make sure that people can go, and the limitations are limiting options. If you are a low-income student, unless you can find outside financing, it is unlikely that you can now become a physician or a lawyer. And so it just limits opportunities. And so in terms of accessing education, all of these proposals are limiting opportunities and the attack is on those that can't write a check. Some people go into medical school. A lot of people just write the check. That's not helpful for most people, and certainly those from a low-income background, and those areas that need the support the most. As Representative Hayes was saying, those communities that need the support the most will have people from their communities unable to come back as physicians, dentists, lawyers, teachers, social workers, that kind of thing, because they couldn't afford to go to college. So with that, we'll have closing statements.
Yeah, I just think that we have to really be creative and think outside of the box and say, what can we do holistically to help students stay engaged? I think that there have been, some really creative solutions that I've been attracted to. Governor Westmore has a community service learning as part of his administration where young people can get credits or forgiveness or different things. I know years ago there used to be a program in my it was actually a federal program, Officer Next Door, Teacher Next Door, where they would help you with the down payment on a house if you worked and lived in the same community where you taught. There are lots of just creative solutions that we have to think about to say, even if we can't ease the valve on student loan, what other areas can we say we can release the pressure here? Child care solutions, whatever, because a family is not looking at, okay, this, as you said, all the other bills are there. So all of those bills are being paid out of one pot. So if you can say, okay, we can alleviate something here, then, until we are back in a position to right-size some of these wrongs, I just think that we have to have every option on the table, be as creative as we know how to be, work with every partner that we can to make sure that these are, I look at this in a very different way. You talked about black women attaining college educations. I think it's personal, and there's a different level of investment there. And I talk to a lot of my colleagues about this often. I went to college because my grandmother could not. There's a different level of investment. There's a different level of commitment from families who are saying to their children, I want you to go to college. And you see that more in the black community, even if the parents themselves didn't go. There's some legacy connected to that. So we have to, I just think that there are parts, I'm not saying tear down the system and rebuild it, but we need to acknowledge what works and what doesn't work and be bold and unapologetic in removing the things that don't work and continuing to create opportunities for young people. And I will not accept that they just shouldn't go to college as a solution. I got to go vote. Thank you.
Witnesses for being with us, and this won't be the last time we talk about this issue.
Sorry.
Thank you.
I never saw Lady with the sign. Did you see her?
I did see her.
Oh, I never